I was watching some stuff on um, video capture and different video output methods and things like that. One of like a couple of the games that people mentioned, you know how Conker's Bad Fur Day is notoriously a difficult game to emulate because it just doesn't want to load or doesn't want to control right or something glitches in it.
Yeah.
But it's also bad for video because the game's naturally dark and muddy graphics anyway. And so when you try to emulate it and upscale it, you either get even more dark and muddy or you get washed out, smoothed and washed out, which you can't really find a good medium for that game. And then somebody had an issue with I don't remember if it was the Kirby 64 game or it's another 64 game, and it was a Mario game, or not a Mario game, a Nintendo game, but I think it might have been Kirby. And that game, the colors, it's a bright, colorful, vibrant world, but when you run it through an upscaler, the colors never seem to come out right. Like they come out again washed out. You either have the game either looks really really chunky and blocky because it's an N64 game, or it looks smooth and really washed out. So there's just some for the most part when I was looking at it with a lot of 64 games, you have to pick your poison when you're running them through upscalers and stuff. Now, emulators obviously would give you, if you're using software emulation.
And this is still doable. I mean,
Yeah.
if we
But
can get past that one part without blowing up the things, then I think we're pretty well home free. But
but like I said, like if you don't notice a difference with it with emulation, then I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Obviously, we both have the physical hardware, so we can do it that way. I'm not against emulation in general, but I think that it has to be used for specific reasons. Like I don't agree with the fact that games are not, like, old games are not archived somewhere and are not readily available to people, and I think that's wrong. And when they become too expensive to play legit, then emulation's the way to go. But emulation is used to just flat out pirate things that are readily available and easy to get, and that is when I draw the line at emulation, you know?
right, I completely agree because you could. I went. Oh, shoot!
He missed. He's in the corner.
Oh, I ran away.
No, he's right there. You stopped mid idea.
I was gonna say because you should be able to buy, it, or if you could play the, I wouldn't mind paying extra or something to get maybe not full price of what they originally were when you released them way back when, but
Well, I think Nintendo. So people complain that Nintendo Online doesn't have a good enough selection to justify being a subscription service. But I think what plays into that a lot is licensing, because not every game that was on the NES and SNES was a Nintendo franchise. So they're not going to be able to provide every single game because they have to work out licensing agreements with the publishers that own the licenses. But in an ideal world, all previous gen games and things like that would be available through like a streaming or through a subscription service of some kind, you know? Like you subscribe to have access to the library, you know, like a gaming Netflix.
Yeah, and I wouldn't mind that either, provided that there was enough selection.
Right, but that's where you get into the licensing issues. And Nintendo's notorious for not wanting to pay anybody anything. They want all the money.
And I think that's why, honestly, they make less money in some situations because they do that. I think they would make more money if they just...
Like back in the NES days, Nintendo had... So when game developers and publishers wanted to put games on the NES, they bought the cartridges from Nintendo. Like they bought the cartridges and the circuit boards from Nintendo because they had chips in them that prevented unlicensed games and stuff from being played on the NES. So the NES had a chip that would talk to a chip in the cartridge that was on the board on the cartridge with the game. And so they had to pay for these. Well, they also had different sized memory ones and things like that. Like they also did that with the Switch as well. Like they have different sized Switch cartridges as well that Nintendo sells. But they buy them straight from Nintendo, and so Nintendo would charge them exorbitant prices because how else are they going to get their game out there? Nintendo, you know, the NES wasn't necessarily the only game in town, but if you really wanted your game to be noticed, you put it on a Nintendo system. And that's why you then had other developers go out and, you know, start making stuff for other systems that didn't necessarily do as well. Namco especially had an issue with Nintendo. They got tired of Nintendo charging so much, and Nintendo would limit you on how many games you could release in a year, which is why you see a lot of subsidiary companies releasing games. So Konami made the Ninja Turtle games for the NES, but they published them under a subsidiary called Ultra. And that's how they got around the limits on the number of games that could be released. That's how a lot of companies got around that. But Namco wanted to release games, and they didn't like how Nintendo kind of had a monopoly and was kind of strong-arming everybody. And so they switched over to the PC engine. They went to NEC and were releasing games on the PC engine, which here is called the TurboGrafx 16. But that ended up not doing very well. Here, anyway. Like, I never knew anybody that had one. I didn't even know... Like, the TurboGrafx 16 was like... I was vaguely aware of something called that, but I never knew anybody that ever had one. But that's why Namco went to them, was because they didn't like Nintendo's methods. And a lot of publishers didn't like Nintendo's methods, but that's how you got your game out there. So yeah, Nintendo's always had some shady business practices. I mean, well, they're not shady, they're legit business practices, but they're questionable when you start looking at trying to be the one game in town, which I get every business wants to be the only game in town, but at the same time, those kind of business practices are not good for the consumer. You have to have healthy competition, or the consumer gets fucked every time.
Yep.
That said, if I had to pick a system that was better, I think Nintendo did well with... I agree with their limiting of how many games a company could release, because while there's a lot of garbage on Nintendo, there's far less garbage on the NES than there was on, you know,
regular Nintendo.
Well, no. So on NES, there's a lot less garbage there than there was on Atari. You know, before the gaming industry crash, um, basically we're living in what, like, if gaming hadn't already solidified into the juggernaut, the gaming industry hadn't solidified into the juggernaut that it is now, Steam would have already caused the second video game crash because of the amount of garbage, just plain garbage that people can put out and charge money for. The only difference between Steam having all of that and any online store, really any of the online stores, like Nintendo, the Nintendo store, or PSN, the amount of garbage that you can, Xbox Live, all that stuff, the amount of garbage you can download from those is absolutely ridiculous. But there's a rating system, so they're kind of, while there's not as much oversight maybe as there should be, there's at least community oversight where the community regulates. And so if a game is a complete and utter piece of shit, people are gonna, it's gonna get out quickly that it's a piece of shit. So the people that are making those games are not gonna make as much money as they wanted. However, we're now in the interesting climate of people buying games simply because they're shit.
Yes.
But and I've been accused of that, buying games simply because they're shit. But at the same time, I've done that on a couple of occasions. Like early on when we were talking about what we would do for the channel, and I was like, let's get some games that are just complete garbage that we'll just try for one-offs and stuff like that. But we quickly came to realize neither of us can stand playing shitty games. So we don't intentionally set out to play a shitty game. We will play a game that might not necessarily have the best ratings, but we're not playing it because it's supposed to be shitty. We're playing it to see if if it's entertaining at all. But I mean, what?
So did you see that? I don't know how much health I have. Oh. Okay.
I saw an explosion.
Well,
I saw a guy come out. Did he throw a grenade?
Well, now I got to figure out if I can hit. This is gonna be a little tricky.
Got that one. There's another guy in there, clearly. There he is.
Well, there's a scientist in there, too.
You got him. Get him. Get him. Dead.